This is from Philosophy Practice 1. I'm rewinding this a little bit. The critical philosophies taught in Western universities take the right to criticize and demand it for themselves while near simultaneously denying the right of others to criticize their criticism. In this way, they betray their literal hatred of both humanity and truth-seeking. Sanity and resiliency are seen as things to be conquered as they support traditional values such as the biological family unit, freedom of speech, free and open markets, etc. Isolated, deranged people with no pride in their own history and no means of self-support are easy to enslave. This is really straight from the communist agenda beginning in about the 1920s. Drive people crazy, disconnect them from their traditions, criticize every single thing, which is really Socratic. You are allowed to criticize everything, but what they do is they prevent us from criticizing their criticism. The ultimate goal of all authoritarian states is torture for the purpose of torture itself, and always begins with calls for justice and by implication compassion, but only for the in-group. This has happened before, is happening now, and will happen again. For a right-wing example, look to Franco's Spain. The ironic thing is that the freedom to criticize the ruling elite or anyone is a Socratic ideal. Communism has some basis in Socratic thinking. The right to criticize isn't communist. What Socrates thought is that if you wanted to be a politician, you had to study physical fitness, art, religion, business, science. You had to be challenged, and by the time you're 50, you could be a politician, at which time you would have no connection to your children because you wouldn't have time for that. So children will be held communally. So when I say that there's a similarity between what Socrates thought and what communists thought, that's what I'm talking about. Oh, that's what I said here. In his ideal world, men with political power would not know who their children were, nor would children know their fathers. In that respect, at least, the modern authoritarians have really realized the Socratic vision. An important part of this philosophy, which is the one I'm describing here, not communist philosophy, an important part of this philosophy involves describing what freedom is, and the second is exploring what I would like to call the Jesus-Hitler continuum. Both will surprise you. I'm going to explain these two aspects and then provide an example of how they might be implicated practically. At the core of this philosophy is the conviction that there's nothing more important than freedom, and that freedom consists of devotion to two things simultaneously: love and truth. Compassion is an element of love. Without truth, it can quickly become perverse and sinister, and is used for sinister ends on a consistent basis. This is the main issue of our time. Gratitude is more important than compassion, and it indeed is difficult to imagine that an ungrateful person could possess any practical compassion worth anything, as evidenced by the pandemic of inhumane hypocrisy we see everywhere. I hope that I said inhumane hypocrisy. Ultimate freedom is in this conception consists in precisely one thing, and that is the freedom to do the right thing. Any other thing than the right thing is bondage to hate, greed, jealousy, vengeance, lust for power, etc. In order to decide upon the right action, you need to be connected to the purest aspect of your heart and the highest functions of your mind, to your critical thinking capacity. Having used these two aspects of yourself and decided upon the ethically correct course of action in consultation with other people who are similarly connected to the best of themselves and uncorrupted as far as possible by bias, intoxication, mental illness, or ideology, and you can act upon decisions you make regardless of personal cost. Having done this, you'll be free of the worst bondage of all, and that is a bad conscience. Of course, this is an ideal conception unattainable by any human being, but it can be useful to have an ideal in order to at least understand the direction that needs to be taken. This is the first aspect of my philosophy, and I think it is essentially unassailable. I did not invent it. The early Greek philosophers did. I cannot imagine any sane person disagreeing with it, unless they fall somewhere to the right of the Jesus-Hitler continuum. So far, in fact, as to emerge on the extreme edge of the left, the two positions are in many respects, identical, and in some respects polar opposites, as you would expect. Communism and fascism are more similar than different, but they are polar opposites in some sense. And so, philosophy practice 3 is where it gets really heavy.